Hey everyone, and welcome back to the news. Yeah, today is just mad. So Battle for Azeroth has been confirmed to be the fastest selling WoW expansion ever, but that is not the full picture exactly, and I'll explain why later. Blizzard have met a number of controversies head on, even going so far as to change how Azerite works. And then of course we've got the Ashara Warbringers analysis. It's a crazy week, and today is also the last news video before the month ends, so it's your, well, pretty much around your last chance to get the Patreon art cards for this month. Of course, it's a really good compliment to last month's one, so there's those. And also on Patreon, we're getting a little bit more back on track. There's Bomb Sandy up on early access, and then also a few vlogs that are currently in the works. Their help has been absolutely tremendous, and you're going to see the fruits of that within the next 2 to 3 weeks, so that's pretty hype. So let's get into the news, and yeah, we have an update with Azerite gear, and I think you're really going to like this.
That sucks. I think we made a mistake there. That's something we're actually going to change.
So I can't tell you how relieving it was to hear that, well, just to hear that, and then also their admission that they were a bit misguided by their desire to protect players. So do be very clear, as of the next reset, you will be able to trade Azerite gear with other players who are loot eligible, just like it was a trinket, a ring, or any other slot of gear. Now this is massive because Battle for Azeroth's Azerite gear was previously locked to your character. Even if you got a useless bit of Azerite, you couldn't trade it. Now this seemed to be widely disliked, and I think for good reason. This is a social game about player freedom, expression, and teamwork. Locking down Azerite gear was a big hit to that teamwork, and yeah, Blizzard seemed to have forgotten that giving your friend a bit of gear that you don't need is a positive for them and a positive for you, both emotionally and literally, because it's a more efficient use of the resources that you get as a team, which feels good. Now, Blizzard originally decided to lock down the Azerite gear because they felt the system was too complex, to have like a layer of trading and being on top of it. They also felt that the social pressure to trade gear because it was desirable would have been too high, but then they kind of realized, well, it's not that different to trading any other important slot, like say a trinket, and really it's not that complex of a system. Players tend to be pretty smart after all. So put simply, I think they underestimated their players, and in an attempt to coddle us with a smooth and frictionless experience, they managed to damage not only one of the core tenets of the game, but a core tenet of the genre. Now, I'm kind of worried that they feel that this is a case-specific quirk and that they have not learned their lesson. You see, I think this really ties back to the core philosophy about player freedom and expression. More so than ever, Blizzard have a planned path for you, a planned experience, a planned gear curve, moments of excitement even that are very planned. That's fine in paper, and indeed it allows for the easy capture of metrics, predictable player behavior, but we have to remember that this is an MMORPG. The strength is player freedom and expression in a shared world. Overbearing rules and tightly planned and normalized progression goes against that. I think that MMO developers not only have to see themselves as game designers, but they also, in a way, have to see themselves as heads of state. And I mean that in the sense of understanding that their game design decisions impact a living world, perhaps in a way that is quite different to, say, balancing a champion in League or, progression system of a shooter. So, props to them for reverting the Azerite change, but I hope that they see the deeper philosophical underpinnings of why that was a problem in the first place. Next up, the auction house. It's rather dead. Now, if you're not on a large server, you might be confused. Well, you can watch an episode of a TV show while your auction house scans on Draenor EU. I'm not kidding. I ran a TSM scan to sell crafting materials, and it took over 30 minutes. Now, one of the reasons why this happens is often a massive number of auction house pages have to be scanned, and that happens because a small number of players will, instead of posting a stack of 200, they'll post 200 stacks of one. That's 200 times more entries to parse through, and it's one of the big reasons and causes of auction house slowdown on large servers, or even, on smaller servers with a few bad apples. Blizzard plan to fix this by changing how deposits work so that they are based off the number of auctions created. So posting one stack of 200 will cost X gold. Posting 200 stacks of one might cost X times 200 gold, with X being the base deposit cost. Now, this means that there's a financial incentive to post larger stacks. Now, would it slightly hurt people who maybe want to do 4 stacks of 50? Yeah, but that would only be 4 times the deposit of, like posting 1 stack of 200 versus 200 times the price if you wanted to post 200 stacks of one. And this only applies to things like herbs and leather, those crafting mats, and it will be coming pretty soon. And yeah, I can't wait, because doing the profession game is pretty much impossible in some servers. People are actually reverting to using the mailbox COD system, even like paying massive premiums on items. So it's great they found that problem, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to the fix. Next up, we've got to talk about artifact knowledge, because it didn't kick in this week, but we have excellent news. Blizzard have confirmed that the Heart of Azeroth catch-up system will kick into gear next week. Now, this operates automatically behind the scenes, just like the patch 7.3 artifact knowledge system from Legion. Now, from this point onwards, every week, I believe, your Heart of Azeroth levels will have a 30% cheaper AP cost, and that'll just keep on going, which means that as time goes on, getting a decently high level will be quite fast. However, the catch-up will, eventually intersect with how the AP costs grow exponentially to make it where there always will be a point where grinding more and more AP is very inefficient. A bit like how if you're trying to grind out like AP rank 20 right now. So overall, this will feel very similar, almost identical to the Legion system, but we'll have some smaller numbers, which is nicer, and yeah, it'll just operate automatically, and it means that if you come back to the expansion in 4 months, you'll pretty much get up to speed quite quickly. Okay, let's move on. We actually have some news that honestly surprised me at first. Battle for Azeroth is the highest selling World of Warcraft expansion ever. Yep, that's higher than initial WoD sales, higher than initial Legion sales, although not by much, like for like anyway. So Legion sold 3.3 million copies, while BFA sold 3.4 million. What does this mean? Well, it means that Legion probably did a really good job of re-establishing the core player base of World of Warcraft. That's absolutely a good thing. I think BFA also did a good job with its marketing. They had a big, well-received cinematic, and they had enough in the way of punchy plot points that they got headlines, and they spread the word far beyond the normal scope of people who are reading WoW content. I mean, how that Starfang cinematic, it's got half the lifetime views of the main Legion cinematic and double the likes, and that's in like 3 weeks of time. So overall, it seems like community engagement is super strong for BFA, and I've certainly seen this in YouTube, where even though the pre-patch content was quite lackluster in comparison to Legion, there was massive interest in the plot points, and people were really engaged. Now, this might seem like good news, and it absolutely is, but a little bit of it could be kind of misleading, and might make things look better than they are. Now, this is not to be negative, but you've got to remember that pre-orders for BFA began earlier on in this year, and they included immediate access to allied races. Now, that was absolutely massive, and those pre-sales are included in the sales numbers that Blizzard have presented. Now, we know that the pre-orders were significantly up for BFA, of course, because of the allied races, so this points towards Battle for Azeroth maybe having, I would say, a slightly smaller but very highly engaged audience. And this somewhat works with what Perculia said. She was site director of Wowhead, and posted that she noticed Blizzard didn't talk about concurrence in their press release, and that's contrasting with what they did with Legion, and that's kind of led to speculation that the immediate concurrent players are down in comparison to Legion's launch, which is something that is backed up from her end by the viewership data on wowhead.com. Now, that kind of makes sense. Battle for Azeroth is actually a lot shorter than Legion with its initial endgame, because in BFA you're right into the groove of world quests, dungeons, and islands. Well, in Legion at this point we were all doing Suramar, we were grinding ancient mana, we were going through that quest line, we were unlocking more of it, we were doing the Withered scenario, so, and then of course in addition to the dungeons, world quests, etc. And indeed, when you look at the press release, Blizzard are very quick to point out how much content BFA has coming with Mythic Plus, Uldir, and of course Warfronts. So while BFA certainly is doing very well, I'm not 100% sure if we should go with our gut feeling on that press release, but certainly it's extremely good news for the World of Warcraft team. I suppose from my end, it's like, look, whenever a company releases a press release, I think, it's only responsible that I try to delve into it a little bit more. With that said, though, let's move on to the rest of the Q&A. We'll do it quickfire. So, their position on World Quest group finding add-ons has not changed. Their core problem is one of game design, and personally, my position hasn't changed either. I entirely agree with their reasoning. I think those things are bad for the game, but I think that world quests are not good bits of content, and I think that the main reason why these add-ons exist is to smooth over a weak point in the game design and reduce player frustration so that they can focus on the content that they like. I think that worrying too much about World Quest Group Finder is a red herring. I think the core problem is the design of the world content, so I think we need to step back, we need to think from first principles rather than immediately jumping into the fray and focusing on the immediate problem and symptoms. Now, next on the topic of guilds and communities, well, they are looking into better mod tools, including account-wide wide bands for communities, which is great. Now, communities themselves, they launched as an MVP with the goal of seeing what players would want and evolving from there. Then guilds were simplified a little bit with the new system, but they are open to re-examining that feature set based on feedback. Now, when asked about islands feeling a bit unrewarding past getting the weekly, Ian pretty much said, yeah, that's their intent. You should feel okay to stop them after the weekly, and I totally agree. Doing 7 of them a week is perfectly reasonable in my view. Then the same sort of goes for World Quest, where Ian said, again, they're totally fine if you don't feel like doing a World Quest for gear once you've got Dungeon and Raid gear. Again, I think that makes total sense. Now, on the topic of War Mode balance, this is interesting. Ian said that they do broadly want to increase the population and they might look at rewards again, but he said that one large issue is that the group finder can pull 40 people into a shard for a World Quest, like one of the boss ones, and then that throws off the faction balance of the shard, which will cause it to rebalance a bit, which then, once those 40 people leave because of their World Quest being done, it then just leaves a shard that is thrown off in terms of balance. So they are looking at doing some systemic changes to essentially better load balance that and be able to predict, 40 Alliance players have came into this Horde zone, but it's probably just because they're going to do this World Quest and then immediately all disappear again. So I think, once more, it's an example of it's really hard to design world content when you also have a cross-realm system operating. And then next, we've got to get philosophical again, because PvP rewards were brought up, and yeah, it's time for me to talk about player freedom. So, when asked why not have a vendor instead of fixed progression for the conquest stuff, Ian said that a vendor often would have correct progression anyway, and that they like the simplicity of rewards being in the UI. Well, first, your players aren't stupid. Second, if someone already raids but wants to dabble in PvP to get an extra bit of gear from the vendor, well, if a vendor exists, then they have the freedom to use that currency as best fits them and their individual situation. Now, that is not compatible with the progress path as dictated by Blizzard, and this really just shines a light at a problem with how so much of their design with the game's reward systems, the design just falls apart as soon as a player wants to deviate from what Blizzard expects, and that's the problem with making things so rigid. And say, much like with Glass, designing it like this just makes their game design more fragile, and I think less applicable to an MMORPG where player freedom is one of the main selling points. If there was a vendor, and I wanted to maybe upgrade my glove by quickly doing some 2v2s with a guildmate, then I could do that. This would be an example where freedom would equal content. With this system, though, I can't do that because I've got to go through their fixed, dictated gear progression. And I think my end point is you absolutely can streamline the unique strengths of an MMO out of an MMO, and I don't think that's a good thing to do. So there you go, that's the Q&A. Some great news, of course, with Azerite and all that, but not really a massive amount to talk about past that. And yeah, there we have it for the news. I think a wonderful short with Ashara. We have loads of positive changes for Battle for Azeroth. It's especially great to see that Azerite is that Azerite change is being brought in before the raids kick off. I think that's just going to make so many guilds really happy. And even for me, just doing, casually doing some Mythic Zeros, that's going to feel really good. There is one other thing I did forget to cover. They said that one slight area of concern that is on their radar is that Azerite gear might be a little bit too random from Mythic Plus, if that's something that people are mainly doing, because it only comes from the Mythic Plus chest that's weekly, so that is something that they did mention they wanted to take a look at. But there you go, that is pretty much it for the news. I am dead keen to hear what you've got to say, especially on these topics of player freedom. Like with, say, smoothing out the PvP gear curve in a way that's very simple and accessible, but maybe has less freedom and is able to fit into the gameplay schedules of fewer players. What you think about the Azerite trading. I'd be really keen to hear just how people are on that topic. So let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching this video, and a massive thank you to everyone over on Patreon, of course. Running out of time to get these bad boys, which of course go great with these bad boys, which were from last month, and then a massive thank you to them. There are very cool developments behind the scenes that you will see in 2 to 3 weeks, and a large part of it is because of all the awesome support on Patreon. So, guys, thanks for watching the video, and I will see you next time.